A scientist testified today, and C-SPAN didn't cover it. His name is Dr. Quay, and he's getting no money from NIH or NIAD. And he has delivered some testimony you should hear.
Don't miss what's happening. People on X are the first to know. Post. See new posts. Conversation. Kaneko the Great at Kaneko the Great. Revolving light physician scientist Dr. Stephen Key at Key_DR. Highlights 6 reasons COVID-19 is most likely a gain of function laboratory leak. 1. Hospital, antibody, and wastewater data indicates the virus was spreading in Wuhan and globally by the fall of 2019. The virus was spreading in Wuhan and around the world in the fall of 2019, months before the first case in the Hunan seafood market. This is supported by 14 observations or evidence. The evidence includes the calculation of the time to the most recent common ancestor. Hospital overloads in Wuhan, antibodies and patients from Italy, Spain, and the U.S. wastewater samples from Brazil. Sick athletes at the October Wuhan military games. School closings in Wuhan, and dozens of documented patients. This dismisses out of hand the market as the origin. 2. Examination of human infections, animal samples, and environmental specimens from the market shows no infected animals or wildlife vendors. With SARS-1, literally 100% of the market animals were infected. None of these data are consistent with an infected animal passing SARS-2 to a human at the market. 3. Events from March 2019, including unusual activities by the Chinese Communist Party and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, suggest a lab-acquired infection had occurred. This timeline includes unusual attention from the Chinese Communist Party, leading to a PLA physician soldier being put in charge. Large tender request to repair biosafety equipment. A virus database disappearing in the middle of the night. Large tender requests for a lab security force to handle foreign personnel. Patents for a device to prevent a lab-acquired infection. These events taken together are a classic example of closing the barn door after the horses left. 4. There is no zoonotic evidence, with 96,000 animals testing negative for SARS-CoV-2 and no evidence of posterior diversity in the virus genome. Historical comparisons with SARS-CoV-1 show multiple spillover events, which are absent in SARS-CoV-2. 5. The genome of SARS-CoV-2 has 8 synthetic features not found in natural viruses. The probability that SARS came from nature based on these features is 1 in a billion. These features are the backbone, the receptor binding domain, the furin cleavage site, the genetics of the furin cleavage site, the number, location, and pattern of cloning sites that use the Barrick cloning method, and the inaudible gene. 6. These same features were described in a 2018 DARPA grant by WIV and U.S. scientists. With respect to the grant, SARS-2 had the proposed backbone from the proposed reason in China. The proposed adaptation to human killing. The proposed diversity from SARS-1. The proposed nocium cleavage site number, location, and pattern. The proposed human cleavage site at the proposed S1-S2 junction. What happens if we have these hearings and nothing happens? The Wuhan Institute of Virology is testing a Nipah virus in a synthetic clone. This is a US CDC bioterrorism agent that kills 3 out of 4 people. A lab leak with an airborne Nipah virus would quickly within weeks disrupt food and energy distribution, fire and police services, and medical care. My analysis of this tipping point event is that it would set back civilization about 250 years. The work of this committee is critical. If we now fail to act with the knowledge we have, history, if it can still be recorded, will judge us poorly. 3:12 p.m. June 18, 2024. 65.8k views 894. Reposts 44. Quotes 1,930 likes 570. Bookmarks.
So, they're working on another virus at the Wuhan lab that'll kill 2 out of 3 people worldwide. COVID bioweapon release cost $60 trillion and ruin our economy, and they used it for canceling in-person voting. We must stop these people. This is the testimony from Dr. Stephen Quay that C-SPAN blocked today before the COVID Select Committee.
Spanning academic medical research, biotechnology, and scientific fraud investigation. My biography summarizes my career. I speak today, however, fraud investigation. My biography summarizes my career. I speak today, however, as an independent scientist. I do not receive any NIH or NIAID funding. Scientists dependent on NIH or NIAID funding may have pressure to publicly agree with orthodoxies that privately they admit are wrong. My approach to the COVID pandemic origin that killed 20 million plus people, caused $20 trillion in economic damage, is based on 6 approaches to the data and the events. I'll start with something Dr. Gary said privately, quote, "Someone should tell Nature," meaning the British journal, "that the fish market probably did not start the outbreak," end quote. I agree with Dr. Gary. Unfortunately, one reason we are having these hearings is that the public statements of many virologists have not been congruent with their private conversations. In any case, I'll describe the 6 approaches to the question that all support a lab leak as a source and can go deeper into each of those with questions. First, the virus was spreading in Wuhan and around the world in the fall of 2019, months before the first case in the Hunan seafood market. This is supported by 14 observations or evidence. The evidence includes the calculation of the time to the most recent common ancestor, hospital overloads in Wuhan, antibodies in patients from Italy, Spain, and the US, wastewater samples from Brazil, sick athletes at the October Wuhan military games, school closings in Wuhan, and dozens of documented patients. This dismisses out of hand the market as the origin. But second, let's look at the market data. The human infections, the animal samples, and the environmental specimens. These generate 8 observations. No infected animals in the market or the supply chain were infected. No infected wildlife vendors had SARS. All human infections are the non-ancestral lineage B. The environmental specimens with animal DNA have no SARS-2. One vendor had animals from southern China where SARS-2 came from, but this vendor and his animals are negative for SARS-2. Now, only 1 of 14 environmental samples with raccoon dog DNA contains SARS reads, and that contains 1 read out of 210 million. 13 of the 14 raccoon dog DNA specimens had no SARS-2. With SARS-1, literally 100% of the market animals were infected. I frankly think it is shameful for scientists to mislead journalists and the public, saying these data I just described are evidence raccoon dogs were infected with SARS-2. This is why trust in science is broken. None of these data are consistent with an infected animal passing SARS-2 to a human at the market. The 1,500-kilometer distance to the nearest SARS-2 related virus is like the distance from Washington, D.C. to the Florida Everglades. Imagine you're at dinner at a restaurant in North Bethesda near the NIAID labs. You get sick, and you are told that the virus you caught is only found in bats from the Everglades, but it also happens to be under study at the laboratories you see outside the restaurant window. That's what the market origin people are asking you to believe. Third, documented events at or related to Wuhan Institute of Virology beginning in March 2019 are consistent with the expected activities when a lab-acquired infection has occurred. This timelines include unusual attention from the Chinese Communist Party, leading to the PLA physician soldier being put in charge. Large tender requests to repair biosafety equipment, a virus database disappearing in the middle of the night, large tender requests for a lab security force to, quote, handle foreign personnel, end quote, patents for a device to prevent a lab-acquired infection, rumors in the virology community of a new SARS virus in the lab, 30 vials of the 3 most dangerous Viruses on the planet being shipped illegally from a lab in Canada to WIV in March, and then one of those pathogens being found as a major contaminant in a BLSA lab in December. These events taken together are a classic example of closing the barn door after the horse has left. Fourth, the evidence that is found in a natural zoonosis with respect to the animal host, the virus, and the human are missing with COVID. 96,000 animals were tested and are negative for SARS-2. 43,000 blood samples from blood donors in Wuhan were tested. A natural spillover like SARS-1 would have produced about 260 positives. A lab accident would be zero, and of course, zero is what is found. With respect to the virus, a spillover produces posterior diversity in the virus genome. A lab leak does not. SARS-2 has no posterior diversity. Natural spillovers, as Dr. Gary indicated this morning, involve multiple markets. SARS-1 began in southern China, had 11 spillovers in 11 different markets in 9 different cities. Christian Anderson, the proximal origin of SARS-2, said SARS-2 was one person being infected with one animal. I agree. Fifth, the genome of SARS-2 has 8 features found in a synthetic virus that are not found in natural viruses. The probability that SARS-2 came from nature based on these features is 1 in a billion. These features are the
1 in a
backbone, the
billion. It
receptor
came
binding
from the
domain,
Wuhan
the furin
market.
cleavage site, the genetics of the furin cleavage site, the number, location, and pattern of cloning sites in SARS-2 that use the Barrick cloning method and the ORF8 gene. Based on SARS-2 cloning sites, I predicted how SARS-2 could be made in the laboratory. A year later, Barrick used the predicted steps to make an infectious clone of SARS-2. These same features were described in a 2018 DARPA grant by WIV and U.S. scientists. With respect to the grant, SARS-2 had the proposed backbone from the proposed region in China, the proposed adaptation to human killing, the proposed diversity from SARS-1, the proposed noceum cleavage site number, location, and pattern, the proposed human cleavage site at the proposed S1-S2 junction. Let's close with a thought experiment. It's 2018. Do you think a market spillover of a coronavirus could have happened in Wuhan? Dr. Dasick and Shi have studied coronaviruses for a decade, and they said no. How do I know that? Because they used Wuhan residents as control for a study looking for antibodies in coronaviruses in people living near bat caves in southern China. The rural residents had a 3% rate, Wuhan residents had 0. Let's flip that and ask the reverse question. Do you think a lab-acquired infection could begin in Wuhan, a city with the world's leading laboratory collecting coronavirus from nature, doing synthetic biology on coronaviruses, doing petri dish and animal research on coronavirus, with a bat colony for testing, and that had written a blueprint to make a coronavirus that had 7 unique features found in SARS-CoV-2? I'll let you answer that question yourself. I have a number of specific reforms I believe should be implemented, and I would be happy to discuss them during the questioning. What happens if we have these hearings and nothing happens? The Wuhan Institute of Virology right now is testing a Nipah virus in a synthetic clone. This is a US CDC bioterrorism agent that kills 3 out of 4 people. A lab leak with an airborne Nipah virus would quickly, within weeks, disrupt food and energy distribution, fire and police services, medical care. My analysis of this tipping point event is that it would set back civilization about 250 years. The work of this committee is critical. If we now fail to act with the knowledge we have, history, if it can still be recorded, will judge us poorly. Thank you for your time. I am a physician scientist and have a 50-year career spanning academic medical research, biotechnology.
They already killed 20 million people worldwide. All the other scientists that work for the NIH are covering up for Fauci because all that grant money on gain of function will stop. It's going on right now in Washington State, at University of Washington, and at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and at the Wuhan lab. Still, gain of function is got to stop. Anyway, this is his name is Stephen Quay. He testified today on C-SPAN, and C-SPAN did not cover it. C-SPAN is covering up for the Democrats. They released a bioweapon to shut down the economy and stop in-person voting. George Soros spent $5 billion on lawsuits in every single state, circumventing the Constitution, which states each state legislature shall make election law. And that did not happen. Did it? No, it did not. And that is how they stole the election, and they stole our democracy and killed 20 million people as a byproduct.